Carmen by Prosper Mérimée. Chapter 3, Part 1. I was born, he said, at Elizondo, in the valley of Bazdan. My name is Don José Lizarabengoa, and you know enough of Spain, sir, to know at once, by my name, that I come of an old Christian and Basque stock. I call myself Don because I have a right to it, and if I were at Elizondo I could show you my parchment genealogy. My family wanted me to go into the church and made me study for it, but I did not like work. I was too fond of playing tennis, and that was my ruin. When we Navarrais begin to play tennis, we forget everything else. One day when I had won the game, a young fellow from Alava picked a quarrel with me. We took to our maquilas, and I won again, but I had to leave the neighborhood. I fell in with some dragoons and enlisted in the Almanza cavalry regiment. Mountain folks like us soon learn to be soldiers. Before long I was a corporal, and I had been told I should soon be made a sergeant, when to my misfortune I was put on guard at the Seville tobacco factory. If you have been to Seville, you have seen the great building, just outside the ramparts, close to the Guadalquivir. I can fancy I see the entrance and the guard room just beside it even now. When Spanish soldiers are on duty, they either play cards or go to sleep. I, like an honest Navarrese, always tried to keep myself busy. I was making a chain to hold my priming pin out of a bit of wire. All at once, my comrades said, "There's the bell ringing. The girls are coming back to work." You must know, sir, that there are quite 400 or 500 women employed in the factory. They roll the cigars in a great room into which no man can go without a permit from the 24, because when the weather is hot they make themselves at home, especially the young ones. When the work girls come back after their dinner, numbers of young men go down to see them pass by and talk all sorts of nonsense to them. Very few of those young ladies will refuse a silk mantilla, and men who care for that sort of sport have nothing to do but bend down and pick their fish up. While the others watched the girls go by, I stayed on my bench near the door. I was a young fellow then. My heart was still in my own country, and I didn't believe in any pretty girls who hadn't blue skirts and long plaits of hair falling on their shoulders. And besides, I was rather afraid of the Andalusian women. I had not got used to their ways yet. They were always jeering one, never spoke a single word of sense. So I was sitting with my nose down upon my chain, when I heard some bystanders say, "Here comes the gitanella." Then I lifted up my eyes and I saw her. It was that very Carmen you know, and in whose rooms I met you a few months ago. Iron-shod sticks used by the Basques, magistrate in charge of the municipal police arrangements and local government regulations. The costume usually worn by peasant women in Navarre and the Basque provinces. She was wearing a very short skirt, below which her white silk stockings, with more than one hole in them, and her dainty red Morocco shoes, fastened with flame-colored ribbons, were clearly seen. She had thrown her mantilla back to show her shoulders, and a great bunch of acacia that was thrust into her chemise. She had another acacia blossom in the corner of her mouth, and she walked along swaying her hips, like a filly from the Cordova stud farm. In my country, anybody who had seen a woman dressed in that fashion would have crossed himself. At Seville, every man paid her some bold compliment on her appearance. She had an answer for each and all, with her hand on her hip, as bold as the thorough gypsy she was. At first I didn't like her looks, and I fell to my work again. But she, like all women and cats, who won't come if you call them, and do come if you don't call them, stopped short in front of me and spoke to me. "Compadre," said she in the Andalusian fashion, "won't you give me your chain for the keys of my strong box?" "It's for my priming pin," said I. "Your priming pin," she cried with a laugh. "Oh ho, I suppose the gentleman makes lace as he wants pins." Everybody began to laugh, and I felt myself getting red in the face and couldn't hit on anything in answer. "Come, my love," she began again. "Make me 7 ells of lace for my mantilla, my pet pin-maker." And taking the acacia blossom out of her mouth, she flipped it at me with her thumb so that it hit me just between the eyes. I tell you, sir, I felt as if a bullet had struck me. I didn't know which way to look. I sat stock still, like a wooden board. When she had gone into the factory, I saw the acacia blossom, which had fallen on the ground between my feet. I don't know what made me do it, but I picked it up, unseen by any of my comrades, and put it carefully inside my jacket. That was my first folly. 2 or 3 hours later I was still thinking about her, when a panting, terrified-looking porter rushed into the guardroom. He told us a woman had been stabbed in the great cigar room, and that the guard must be sent in at once. The sergeant told me to take 2 men and go and see to it. I took my 2 men and went upstairs. Imagine, sir, that when I got into the room I found, to begin with, some 300 women, stripped to their shifts, or very near it, all of them screaming and yelling and gesticulating, and making such a row that you couldn't have heard God's own thunder. On one side of the room one of the women was lying on the broad of her back, streaming with blood, with an X newly cut on her face by 2 strokes of a knife. Opposite the wounded woman, whom the best-natured of the band were attending, I saw Carmen, held by 5 or 6 of her comrades. The wounded woman was crying out, a confessor, am killed." Carmen said nothing at all. She clenched her teeth and rolled her eyes like a chameleon. "What's this?" I asked. I had hard work to find out what had happened, for all the work girls talked at once. It appeared that the injured girl had boasted she had money enough in her pocket to buy a donkey at the Triana market. "Why," said Carmen, who had a tongue of her own, "can't you do with a broom?" Stung by this taunt it may be because she felt herself rather unsound in that particular. The other girl replied that she knew nothing about brooms, seeing she had not the honor of being either a gypsy or one of the devil's godchildren, but that the Señorita Carmen would shortly make acquaintance with her donkey when the corregidor took her out riding with 2 lackeys behind her to keep the flies off. "Well," retorted Carmen, "I'll make troughs for the flies to drink out of on your cheeks, and he'll paint a draught board on them." And thereupon, slap bank, she began making St. Andrew's crosses on the girl's face with a knife she had been using for cutting off the ends of the cigars. Pintar un javeque, paint a xebec, a particular type of ship. Most Spanish vessels of this description have a checkered red and white stripe painted around them. The case was quite clear. I took hold of Carmen's arm. "Sister mine," I said civilly, "you must come with me." She shot a glance of recognition at me, but she said with a resigned look, "Let's be off. Where is my mantilla?" She put it over her head so that only one of her great eyes was to be seen, and followed my 2 men as quiet as a lamb. When we got to the guard room, the sergeant said it was a serious job, and he must send her to prison. I was told off again to take her there. I put her between 2 dragoons, as a corporal does on such occasions. We started off for the town. The gypsy had begun by holding her tongue. But when we got to the Calle de la Serpiente, you know it, and that it earns its name by its many windings, she began by dropping her mantilla onto her shoulders, so as to show me her coaxing little face, and turning round to me as well as she could, she said, "Oficial mio, where are you taking me to?" "To prison, my poor child," I replied as gently as I could, just as any kind-hearted soldier is bound to speak to a prisoner, and especially to a woman. "Alack, what will become of me? Señor official, have pity on me. You are so young, so good-looking." Then in a lower tone she said, "Let me get away, and I'll give you a bit of the barlachi that will make every woman fall in love with you." The barlachi, sir, is the lodestone, with which the gypsies declare one who knows how to use it can cast any number of spells. If you can make a woman drink a little scrap of it, powdered in a glass of white wine, she'll never be able to resist you. I answered as gravely as I could, "We are not here to talk nonsense. You'll have to go to prison. Those are my orders, and there's no help for it." We men from the Basque country have an accent which all Spaniards easily recognize. On the other hand, not one of them can ever learn to say "Bye, Jauna." "Yes, sir." So Carmen easily guessed I was from the provinces. You know, sir, that the gypsies, who belong to no particular country and are always moving about, speak every language, and most of them are quite at home in Portugal, in France, in our provinces, in Catalonia, or anywhere else. They can even make themselves understood by Moors and English people. Carmen knew Basque tolerably well. "Laguna ene bihotzarena, comrade of my heart," said she suddenly. "Do you belong to our country? Our language is so beautiful, sir, that when we hear it in a foreign country it makes us quiver." "I wish," added the bandit in a lower tone, "I could have a confessor from my own country." After a silence he began again. "I belong to Elizondo," I answered in Basque, very much affected by the sound of my own language. "I come from Echalar," said she. That's a district about 4 hours' journey from my home. I was carried off to Seville by the gypsies. I was working in the factory to earn enough money to take me back to Navarre, to my poor old mother who has no support in the world, but me besides her little barratia with 20 cider apple trees in it. Ah, if I were only back in my own country, looking up at the white mountains. I have been insulted here, because I don't belong to this land of rogues and sellers of rotten oranges, and those hussies are all banded together against me, because I told them that not all their Seville Jacques and all their knives would frighten an honest lad from our country with his blue cap and his maquila. Good comrade, won't you do anything to help your own countrywoman? Field, garden, bravos, boasters. She was lying then, sir, as she has always lied. I don't know that that girl ever spoke a word of truth in her life, but when she did speak I believed her. I couldn't help myself. She mangled her Basque words, and I believe she came from Navarre, but her eyes and her mouth and her skin were enough to prove she was a gypsy. I was mad. I paid no more attention to anything. I thought to myself that if the Spaniards had dared to speak evil of my country, I would have slashed their faces just as she had slashed her comrades. In short, I was like a drunken man. I was beginning to say foolish things, and I was very near doing them. If I were to give you a push and you tumble down, good fellow countryman, she began again in Basque, those 2 Castilian recruits wouldn't be able to keep me back. Faith, I forgot my orders. I forgot everything, and I said to her, well then, my friend, girl of my country, try it, and may Our Lady of the Mountain help you through. Just at that moment we were passing one of the many narrow lanes one sees in Seville. All at once Carmen turned and struck me in the chest with her fist. I tumbled backward purposely. With a bound she sprang over me and ran off, showing us a pair of legs. People talk about a pair of Basque legs, but hers were far better, as fleet as they were well turned. As for me, I picked myself up at once, but I stuck out my lance crossways, and barred the street so that my comrades were checked at the very first moment of pursuit. Then I started to run myself, and they after me. But how were we to catch her? There was no fear of that. What with our spurs, our swords, and our lances, all Spanish cavalry soldiers carry lances. In less time than I have taken to tell you the story, the prisoner had disappeared. And besides, every gossip in the quarter covered her flight, poked scorn at us and pointed us in the wrong direction. After a good deal of marching and countermarching, we had to go back to the guard-room without a receipt from the governor of the jail. To avoid punishment, my men made known that Carmen had spoken to me in Basque, and to tell the truth, it did not seem very natural that a blow from such a little creature should have so easily overthrown a strong fellow like me. The whole thing looked suspicious, or at all events not over clear. When I came off guard, I lost my corporal's stripes, and was condemned to a month's imprisonment. It was the first time I had been punished since I had been in the service. Farewell now to the sergeant's stripes on which I had reckoned so surely. The first days in prison were very dreary. When I enlisted, I had fancied I was sure to become an officer at all events. 2 of my compatriots, Longa and Mina, are captains general after all. Chapalangara was a colonel, and I have played tennis a score of times with his brother, who was just a needy fellow like myself. Now I kept crying to myself, all the time you served without being punished has been lost. Now you have a bad mark against your name. And to get yourself back into the officer's good graces, you'll have to work 10 times as hard as when you joined as a recruit. And why have I got myself punished? For the sake of a gypsy hussy who made game of me, and who at this moment is busy thieving in some corner of the town. Yet I couldn't help thinking about her. Will you believe it, sir? Those silk stockings of hers with the holes in them, of which she had given me such a full view as she took to her heels, were always before my eyes. I used to look through the barred windows of the jail into the street, and among all the women who passed, I never could see one to compare with that minx of a girl. And then, in spite of myself, I used to smell the acacia blossom she had thrown at me, and which, dry as it was, still kept its sweet scent. If there are such things as witches, that girl certainly was one. One day the jailer came in and gave me an Alcala roll. Alcala de los Panaderos, a village 2 leagues from Seville, where the most delicious rolls are made. They are said to owe their quality to the water of the place, and great quantities of them are brought to Seville every day. Look here, said he, this is what your cousin has sent you. I took the loaf, very much astonished, for I had no cousin in Seville. It may be a mistake, thought I, as I looked at the roll, but it was so appetizing and smelt so good that I made up my mind to eat it without troubling my head as to whence it came or for whom it was really intended. When I tried to cut it, my knife struck on something hard. I looked and found a little English file, which had been slipped into the dough before the roll had been baked. The roll also contained a gold piece of 2 piastres. Then I had no further doubt it was a present from Carmen. To people of her blood, liberty is everything, and they would set a town on fire to save themselves one day in prison. The girl was artful indeed, and armed with that roll I might have snapped my fingers at the jailers. In 1 hour, with that little file, I could have sawn through the thickest bar, and with the gold coin I could have exchanged my soldier's cloak for civilian garb at the nearest shop. You may fancy that a man who has often taken the eaglets out of their nests in our cliff would have found no difficulty in getting down to the street out of a window less than 30 feet above it. But I didn't choose to escape. I still had a soldier's code of honor, and desertion appeared to me in the light of a heinous crime. Yet this proof of remembrance touched me. When a man is in prison, he likes to think he has a friend outside who takes an interest in him. The gold coin did rather offend me. I should have very much liked to return it, but where was I to find my creditor? That did not seem a very easy task. After the ceremony of my degradation, I had fancied my sufferings were over, but I had another humiliation before me. That came when I left prison, and was told off for duty, and put on sentry as a private soldier. You cannot conceive what a proud man endures at such a moment. I believe I would have just as soon been shot dead. Then I should have marched alone at the head of my platoon, at all events. I should have felt I was somebody, with the eyes of others fixed upon me. I was posted as sentry on the door of the colonel's house. The colonel was a young man, rich, good-natured, fond of amusing himself. All the young officers were there, and many civilians as well, besides ladies, actresses, as it was said. For my part, it seemed to me as if the whole town had agreed to meet at that door in order to stare at me. Then up drove the colonel's carriage, with his valet on the box. And who should I see get out of it but the gypsy girl? She was dressed up this time, to the eyes, togged out in golden ribbons, a spangled gown, blue shoes, all spangled too, flowers and gold lace all over her. In her hand she carried a tambourine. With her there were 2 other gypsy women, one young and one old. They always have one old woman who goes with them, and then an old man with a guitar, a gypsy too, to play alone, and also for their dances. You must know these gypsy girls are often sent for to private houses, to dance their special dance, the romalis, and often too for quite other purposes. Carmen recognized me, and we exchanged glances. I don't know why, but at that moment I should have liked to have been 100 feet beneath the ground. "Agur Laguna," said she. "Official mio." You keep guard like a recruit, and before I could find a word in answer, she was inside the house. "Good day, comrade." The whole party was assembled in the patio, and in spite of the crowd I could see nearly everything that went on through the lattice. I could hear the castanets and the tambourine, the laughter and applause. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of her head as she bounded upward with her tambourine. Then I could hear the officers saying many things to her, which brought the blood to my face. As to her answers, I knew nothing of them. It was on that day, I think, that I began to love her in earnest for 3 or 4 times. I was tempted to rush into the patio and drive my sword into the bodies of all the coxcombs who were making love to her. My torture lasted a full hour. Then the gypsies came out, and the carriage took them away. As she passed me by, Carmen looked at me with those eyes you know, and said to me very low, "Comrade, people who are fond of good frittata come to eat it at Lilas Pastillas at Triana. In most of the houses in Seville there is an inner court surrounded by an arched portico. This is used as a sitting room in summer. Over the court is stretched a piece of tent cloth, which is watered during the day and removed at night. The street door is almost always left open, and the passage leading to the court, zaguan, is closed by an iron lattice of very elegant workmanship. Then, light as a kid, she stepped into the carriage. The coachman whipped up his mules, and the whole merry party departed whither I know not. You may fancy that the moment I was off guard, I went to Triana, but first of all I got myself shaved and brushed myself up as if I had been going on parade. She was living with Lilas Pastilla, an old fried fish seller, a gypsy as black as a Moor, to whose house a great many civilians resorted to eat frittata, especially, I think, because Carmen had taken up her quarters there. Lilas, she said as soon as she saw me, I'm not going to work any more today. Tomorrow will be a day, too. Come, fellow countrymen, let us go for a walk. Manana será otro día, a Spanish proverb. She pulled her mantilla across her nose, and there we were in the street, without my knowing in the least whither I was bound. Señorita, said I think I have to thank you for a present I had while I was in prison. I've eaten the bread. The file will do for sharpening my lance, and I keep it in remembrance of you. But as for the money, here it is. Why, he's kept the money, she exclaimed, bursting out laughing. But after all, that's all the better, for I'm decidedly hard up. What matter? The dog that runs never starves. Come, let's spend it all. You shall treat. Chuquel sospirela, cocalterela. The dog that runs finds a bone, gypsy proverb. We had turned back toward Seville. At the entrance of the Calle de la Serpiente, she bought a dozen oranges, which she made me put into my handkerchief. A little farther on she bought a roll, a sausage, and a bottle of manzanilla. Then, last of all, she turned into a confectioner's shop. There she threw the gold coin I'd returned to her on the counter, with another she had in her pocket, and some small silver, and then she asked me for all the money I had. All I possessed was 1 peseta, and a few cuartos, which I handed over to her, very much ashamed of not having more. I thought she would have carried away the whole shop. She took everything that was best and dearest, yemas, turon, preserved fruits, as long as the money lasted. And all these, too, I had to carry in paper bags. Perhaps you know the Calle del Candilejo, where there is a head of Don Pedro the Avenger. That head ought to have given me pause. We stopped at an old house in that street. She passed into the entry and knocked at a door on the ground floor. It was opened by a gypsy, a thorough-paced servant of the devil. Carmen said a few words to her in Romany. At first the old hag grumbled. To smooth her down, Carmen gave her a couple of oranges and a handful of sugar plums, and let her have a taste of wine. Then she hung her cloak on her back and led her to the door, which she fastened with a wooden bar. As soon as we were alone, she began to laugh and caper like a lunatic, singing out, "You are my rom, im yo romi," sugared yolks of eggs, a sort of nougat. This king, Don Pedro, whom we call the Cruel, and whom Queen Isabella the Catholic never called anything but the Avenger, was fond of walking about the streets of Seville at night in search of adventures, like the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. One night, in a lonely street, he quarreled with a man who was singing a serenade. There was a fight, and the king killed the amorous caballero. At the clashing of their swords, an old woman put her head out of the window and lighted up the scene with a tiny lamp, candilejo, which she held in her hand. My readers must be informed that King Don Pedro, though nimble and muscular, suffered from one strange fault in his physical conformation. Whenever he walked, his knees cracked loudly. By this cracking, the old woman easily recognized him. The next day, the 24 in charge came to make his report to the king. "Sir, a duel was fought last night in such a street. One of the combatants is dead. Have you found the murderer?" "Yes, sir." "Why has he not been punished already?" "Sir, I await your orders. Carry out the law." Now the king had just published a decree that every duelist was to have his head cut off, and that head was to be set up on the scene of the fight. The 24 got out of the difficulty like a clever man. He had the head sawed off a statue of the king and set that up in a niche in the middle of the street in which the murder had taken place. The king and all the civilians thought this a very good joke. The street took its name from the lamp held by the old woman, the only witness of the incident. The above is the popular tradition. Zuniga tells the story somewhat differently. However that may be, a street called Calle del Candilejo still exists in Seville, and in that street there is a bust which is said to be a portrait of Don Pedro. This bust, unfortunately, is a modern production. During the 17th century, the old one had become very much defaced, and the municipality had it replaced by that now to be seen. Rome, husband. Romi, wife.